Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I give my notes and thoughts and etc. on running my group of intrepid adventurers through Out of the Abyss, which is the D&D 5e Underdark Adventure campaign. We're about 75% of the way through it now, maybe a little more, maybe a little bit less, but I've really enjoyed Out of the Abyss. I'm looking forward to keeping running it, but there's also that, that excitement like, oh, we're getting pretty close to the end. So still be several videos, but we have definitely more than crossed the halfway mark. If you're not familiar with this video series, this is not an actual play. It's not a blow by blow of everything that happened in the most recent session. What it is it's a summary of what happened in my most recent session, as well as I'll just offer general thoughts as a DM, maybe rules clarifications, and just general RPG advice in general that maybe could be applied to any RPG. If you're a returning video viewer, if you're a returning viewer, then thanks so much for coming back. I really appreciate all of you, and we will get into viewer feedback now, and then we'll pick up with at the end of last session before this one. They had just come to the Worm Nursery, so we'll find out what happened once they got into the Worm Nursery proper. So let me put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and let's take a look at what we can see here. Got a few comments on video 63. I always appreciate my comments. So first of all is Vasily Chrisen. And Vasily, thank you. You supported my Patreon, and thank you for that. So we'll get to that here in a second. But before I forgot, I wanted to make sure to give Vasily a shout out. And Vasily is comments a lot on these videos and has been an engaged viewer with good questions and etc. So here we go. He said, "Hey, this is the session recap I've been waiting for. Cool. So good. Yeah, we did. The last session was the voice in the dark with the young drow that the party befriended. Your party may not. And then also he said, I love your YouTube moment of introspection for 2017 and 2018. So yeah, I had fun doing that. He said, regarding viewership, please keep doing your videos. These kinds of videos will grow with time. Unlike videos about new product, which blow up for a couple of days and then viewership drops to almost zero, these will continue to be helpful as more people seek help with this difficult book. I thank you for your commitment to help and staying with it consistently. I know that there are those of us who greatly appreciate it. I would even give to a Patreon if you have one. Parenthetically says, not sure if you do. If so, you don't mention it. Thanks and have a happy new year. Okay, so a lot of good stuff in there, Vasily. Let me just say a couple of people kind of commented along the lines of, hey, keep doing your videos. Basically, last video, I did it, I think, on New Year's Day. And I recorded, in fact, let me double check because I think my microphone was on mute last time. I recorded like an hour and a half worth of video. And when I was sat down to edit it, there was no sound on any of it. And I was like, so I had to re-record everything and then edit and all that. So I was kind of like saying, I'm by no means not going to do these videos. I had just, while I was talking about that, I was saying that these videos already, compared to every other type of video I do, or even my radio show, these videos for these Out of the Abyss notes or White Plume Mountain, or if I give notes on running D&D as a DM, it just takes more time than any other type of video I do. So as long as there was stable viewership and people are commenting and interacting, and that's the thing that really convinced me to keep going with these, is because there's a lot of people ask questions and we have good viewer engagement. So I'm in no danger, if you will, of stopping these videos. I had just said something like, if viewership ever drastically drops, or if, the amount of engagement by comments or something really drops, I may reevaluate. But I think on New Year's Day I was like, because I was a little annoyed that I lost all that video, so it may have come across more strongly than I do enjoy doing these videos. And they average now over time. They will tick up and up and up, as Vasily said. Uh, on average, within a few weeks, as long they hit about 100 views, which isn't an immense amount of views, but it's a stable viewership, and we get comments. So cool. I plan to keep doing it because I get people tell me that they're very helpful. So there we go. Just want to reassure everybody, the videos are not planning on stopping anytime soon. Now on the Patreon, and Vasily, thanks for asking about it. I think I have mentioned in the whole time I've been doing these videos, between Out of the Abyss and White Plume Mountain, I may have mentioned Patreon once or twice, but I don't a lot. So here's the deal. Many of you might be aware, but some of you maybe not. And if you're a new viewer, you wouldn't know. I have a live over the air FM radio show. It's a geek talk radio show called Shane Plays Geek Talk, out of Little Rock, Arkansas on 96.5 FM. And then it also streams online simultaneously from the 96.5 FM The Answer website in Little Rock. And I also put it out as a podcast a few days later. And it also goes replays on a internet radio station called Krypton Radio. Now the Patreon that I have set up and that I've kind of worked a little bit for a couple of years is specifically for the radio show, because there's a lot of expenses. It's not a podcast. There's nothing wrong with podcasts. I love podcasts, but this is a full-on in the studio radio show, and that has more overhead and more expenses than like these videos or the podcast, or if I was just doing a podcast or something like that. So that's what the Patreon is for. Between the Patreon for that and sponsors and things, I bring in money to help cover those costs. However, it all works together. The radio show, the podcast, the videos, my blog, all of it work together. So if somebody wants to support the Patreon for my radio show like Vasily did, it does all help. It's sort of a holistic, it's fungible in a way. Any money or whatever that helps the radio show is money that I'm not having to spend on other aspects like running ads for Shane Plays or something like that. So it all works together, even though the Patreon is technically just for the radio show. So if you want to see, it's at patreon.com/ShanePlays. I'll put a link in the video notes. I want to make it clear, just like with my radio listeners, I don't want to ever get it to the point where it's like, hey, support the Patreon or all of this stuff is going away. That has never been my intent, and I don't foresee that being my intent. But it does help. It's raised a little bit, adds up, and over the couple of years I've had the Patreon, it has brought in several $100s to help with the radio show, and that helps all of my Shane Plays efforts. As over time, I would love to continue building Shane Plays as the entire umbrella of what Shane Plays is. And you see I have a very varied content on both my radio show and on this channel, from video games to comic books to role-playing games to all kinds of stuff. It's geek. It's sort of a big geek umbrella. So it all helps. And I do hope to continue growing Shane Plays, as the years go. So again, I don't talk about Patreon a lot, but if any of you want to help support by Patreon, I would definitely not say no. I would say thank you. But I don't want you, I don't want people like, hey, do support by Patreon, because I also run ads on my YouTube videos and stuff like that, and that trickles some money in. So, I don't want people to feel like that I'm twisting their arm. But again, if somebody wants to give by Patreon, again, it's patreon.com/ShanePlays, all one word, ShanePlays. And it all helps, and I appreciate it. One thing to be aware of is the pledge on the Patreon for my Shane Plays is per radio show, not like per month or anything like that. It's per radio show. So depending on how many Saturdays, because it's on Saturdays there are in a month, whatever you pledge would be multiplied by 4 or 5. So just keep that in mind. If you pledged $1, your monthly support can end up being $4 or $5, and then on up from there depending on your pledge level. But again, if none of you pledge, that's fine. and just tell people about the channel, and maybe share my content out. That helps tremendously. Leave likes on the videos and comments. YouTube sees that as engagement and will bubble it up further in the search results, because if they think of people, they're like, hey, people are engaging with this content, so it's relevant to what it says it's about. Right. So anyway, okay, enough of all that. Thank you again, Vasily, not only for pledging, but for asking the question and giving me an opportunity to share that. So, all right, James Swanson said, hey, thanks for the video. It's good to have you back. Happy New Year. Same to you, James. Happy New Year. Sorry the first recording didn't go through. Ooh, me too, but that's all in the past. Tonight we had our 11th session, visited Neverlight Grove. I love the Garden of Horror. It's so awful. It really is. It's awful in a great way. It's a very fun part of the adventure. He said, question, what is the table setup for your Out of the Abyss campaign at your friendly local game store? Is it just a traditional DM screen and PCs with sheets and dice on the other side, or do you ever try to introduce new elements such as props or music to enhance the atmosphere? I try to give each session credits music and sometimes use poker chips as gold so the PCs feel the weight of their spoils. Keep up the good work. Your fans are loyal, so what you may sacrifice in breadth of viewers is traded with depth of appreciation. See, again, there's another very positive. I get a lot of comments saying, hey, this stuff's really appreciated. So I enjoy doing it. I'm really glad people get benefit out of it. So, when it comes to stuff at the table, I'm not opposed to music or props. I use them on a limited scope myself. Maybe handouts I'll use. I do have some fantasy coins that I got from a Kickstarter that every now and then I'll pull out and drop, cha-chunk, give that good clinky sound to add, you're being hired or you're being rewarded or whatever. But I usually don't rely on the extra stuff. Role-playing games for the most part. Now, there are some exceptions, and I see more and more extra elements coming into games, role-playing games. But for the most part, especially D&D, was designed to be used or to be played with some books and dice and pencils and paper. That was basically the original, and miniatures if people were using miniatures. That was basically it. DM screens came along fairly quickly. I personally see a DM screen as essential as the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it really helps the DM a lot, and also and not for the charts and tables. Hardly anybody uses it for that, but for the unless you want players accidentally or purposefully seeing stuff they shouldn't see and spoiling the game, the surprise of the game or the mystery of the game. I think a DM's screen is pretty important, or some sort of method. Maybe you're running everything on a laptop or they can't see, something like that. I try to keep it to that. Now, again, there's some good tools. I think there's like Sirenscape, and there's some other software tools out there that will do mood music or mood sounds. There's soundboards that you can get download on your phone or tablet and for sound effects and stuff like that. Mood lighting, candles, whatever. There's all these dice towers, which I personally I see dice towers as completely as optional as it gets, right? I mean, I know people love them and cool, and I was talking about them the other day on Facebook in the D&D 5th edition Facebook group, and I ran a poll like, well, what's the deal with these dice towers? And some people really love them, but the majority of people are like, really? You don't know how to roll your own dice? So if you love dice towers, cool. I mean, there are people out there that love them, but what I'm saying is, we went decades without stuff like that, so it's not essential to the RPG experience. So for the most part, I keep it just as basic as possible. If players want to bring stuff in, and as long as it's not distracting from the game or whatever, I'm fine with that. I've had players use dice towers and stuff, and maybe play a little bit of soft music or something. I'm cool with that, as long as it's not distracting or disruptive. But I'm not. I don't subscribe to the school of thought that somebody comes along and is like, well, if you haven't been playing with mood music at your table, then you're playing wrong. I'm just not like that. But if there's groups that are like, hey, if we don't have music, something's missing. Fair enough. So anyway, appreciate the question. And you mentioned that you use music. I think yeah, you do credits music. I'm assuming credits music. You mean the opening and closing, which that's very cool. Set the mood to begin and then end on a certain mood. And poker chips. There's nothing wrong with that stuff. It's very cool. I would recommend anybody, any DM, not put themselves into the position where if they don't have that stuff, they feel like something's missing. Your core tools are the rules, the dice, paper, I guess, or an app to track stuff, and your imagination. So that's kind of my take on it. All right. Rob Plummer said, "Hey Shane, Happy New Year." Rob, right back at you. Rob is also a very long time viewer and comments quite often. The haste spell can only give you one of the following actions while it is in effect, which is attack, one weapon attack only, dash, disengage, hide, or use an object. It does not give you an additional casting of a spell. Yeah, and agreed. And what Rob's talking about, last video we had a discussion on there's these spell gems in Out of the Abyss. That's a magic item that allows you to cast a spell into it and then cast it later. And it's a cast action. Like you cast the spell out of it. And so there was a discussion on, that spell gem doesn't allow you to cast a spell out of your own spell casting ability and then also cast an additional spell on the same turn, or in the same round, on the same turn. So you can't, in general, and there's variations to this rule, you can only cast one spell per turn, like one main full action spell, okay, per turn. So, and if you want to know more about that, if everything I just said, you're like, what is he talking about? Go watch the viewer comments or the viewer feedback from the previous video, because it was a really good discussion on those spell gems and also, how many spells can you cast in one turn? And yes, I know that you can, I think you can take a full action and then cast a cantrip as a bonus. I know there's stuff you could do like that. That wasn't the point of the discussion. But yeah, Rob, so we're talking about haste, and all those things are true. The main thrust of the, Rob was clarifying what you can do with haste. The main thrust of the previous video's discussion was whether you're casting haste, and that was the example that was used last video, or some other spell. The spell gem doesn't let you cast extra spells, haste or otherwise. So, but anyway, I appreciate the feedback, Rob. I should have clarified in the last video what haste actually does, and I didn't. So thank you for helping with that. Okay, and then finally, Mike McCarthy said, "Keep up the good work, Shane. It has been a pleasure to follow your party along as I've taken my own through this adventure module." Cool, Mike. Appreciate it. Love that feedback. And I hope you're having as much fun with Out of the Abyss as I am with my players. So I'm going to wrap viewer feedback there, but I'm going to leave my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback on for an extra moment, because I want to talk about the one of the things that came up last session with my players was the help action. Their familiar, they were using their familiar, an owl. That seems to be a recurring theme in my campaigns. It seems like snakes and owls are common familiars with my players. But anyway, the question came up of like, if I send my owl in to do a help combat action, what does that actually do? And there was some misunderstanding that everybody adjacent to that owl would get advantage, and so we clarified that. So here's what the help action does. Says whether you as a player or an NPC or a familiar or whatever, lend your aid to another creature in the completion of a task. When you take the help action, the creature you aid gains advantage on the next ability check it makes to perform the task you are helping with, provided that it makes the check before the start of your next turn. So you're like, I'm helping, and until the start of my next turn, if you take that action, then you can have advantage on it. Specifically in combat, it says alternatively, you can aid a friendly creature in attacking a creature within 5 feet of you. Very important. You feint, distract the target, or in some other way team up to make your ally's attack more effective. If your ally attacks the target before your next turn, the first attack roll is made with advantage. So there you go. So in this case, it's like the owl is like flying and harassing the creature, the opponent, and then the person being helped, if they're within a friendly creature that's attacking a creature within 5 feet of you. And then the way I was reading this is you can aid a friendly creature, so you have to specify who you're aiding when you do the help action. So there you go. Hope that was interesting, or maybe I mangled it, but I think I have it right. So anyway, now having read that, I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and we will get going with talking about the previous session. So here we go. Oh, let me take them off. There we go. All right, here we go. Okay, so make sure. Yeah, I'm really paranoid about my mic not recording. I just stopped and started the recording again. So a couple of things that came up last session. One was I awarded at the end of last session, between sessions, I calculated XP. What I do is I kind of keep track of everything for several sessions, and then I will do an award. However many sessions. This case, I don't know. It's probably been since part 2 began. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, it's been a few. So, and I'll let that build up, and then I'll add everything up, and then I'll award it out to the players. Now, every now and then I'll give an XP award and say, record this on your character sheet right now. Like I gave everybody 500 XP for Christmas. Or when I do when we do the recap where everybody rolls, and whoever rolls the lowest recaps the previous session, but then based on how well they do, they get XP. I'll say, write that down right now. So every now and then I'll be like, write that down right now. But for the most part, as they go, I have a log of, monsters defeated, or when the book says award everybody X amount for doing this or whatever. I keep track of all that, and then I add it up and I hand it out. So showed up, and I asked, and so I doled that out, put the amount on our Facebook group. We have a private Facebook group, and I said, hey, if anybody levels up, let me know, and then tell me what you're doing, and da da da. So didn't hear anything. Showed up to the session this week, and one of the players was like, oh, actually I did level. I just realized I leveled, and I was adding everything up, and so I said, well, what did you take? And they were like, well, I'm figuring out right now. And but they explained, like, they just realized they leveled, which is why they hadn't shared that with me previously. Okay. But somehow, I don't know why, I said, well, how much XP do you have? And they told me. And then I said, okay. And I said, well, how much does everybody else have? And everybody started giving really wide varying different XP amounts. Even characters that have basically been in the campaign the whole time together. So they should be, if not exact, pretty close. And, so I went around the table and said, what do you have? What do you have? What do you have? And it was off a little bit. And I got frustrated, but I went, you know what, whatever, not a big deal. We'll handle this. So I kind of worked, I polled everybody again on how much XP they had. And some people, it made sense for them to not be, maybe they joined the campaign later, or I had one player who missed several sessions, and so on this most recent reward, they got 75% of the award. They didn't get the full 100%. So that kind of accounted for that. Because I'm really, again, I think I talked about this in the last video, I'm really being more strict on people showing up. Now, if they have a legitimate reason why they're not there, fair enough. But if they're like, I just didn't feel like it, or, I was getting a player saying, well, he just felt like he had to do stuff around the house tonight and he didn't come, that kind of thing. I'm going to start docking experience points, because I play at a store and I turn people away pretty routinely because we're full. So if you're going to occupy a slot in the game, you've got to occupy that slot. But anyway, moving on. so it turned out, for whatever reason, I didn't like, wow, how can you guys, I was like, okay, fair enough. So I came up with like a good average XP amount for people to have, um, based on all the variables that I could take together. So the people that had all been in the campaign for the same amount of time were at a set amount, and then people that joined later were at an amount that logically made sense, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I've got one character or one player who just returned, uh, and I have a policy, even though we're full, if you basically earned your stripes in this group, if you were a part of this player at this table for long enough time that you were considered part of the group, and then you had to leave, like for work or school or for some other reasons outside of your control, uh, I always say you can come back. Now, if you're just like, I don't want to play anymore and you leave, then I'm not necessarily going to let you back in. But if it was kind of, this guy had to go away for school, but now he's back. And I said, you can come in. So he rolled up a new player or a new character. And we found, I think I put him, um, instead of, because normally it's okay, roll up at everybody is this level. The group is at, say, 7th level. So take 7th level XP plus 1, and that's where you're at. But for him, since we were redoing everybody's XP, I said be halfway in between level 7 level 8. But what I did was, after I got everybody's stuff fixed, because somehow in the past this happened where, I was awarding out XP, and then, somebody was way off. And so I fixed it then, and this has been months ago. And it may have been more than one person, but I was like, okay, here's the deal. I said, I fixed XP twice. I said, I'm not going to do that again. I said, especially now that we have the Facebook group and I'm awarding out XP and showing where, so we can track how much was awarded when. I said, I won't fix it again. So if your XP gets off and other people are leveling, but you're not, oh well, because I don't award it that often, and it should be fairly easy to keep up with. And yes, I could go back and I could go through all my logs and I could get the exact amount of XP and blah blah blah. But I'm not gonna do that again. As I've said in previous videos, I'm not the group secretary, right? I'm not there I'm not mom and I'm not dad, right? I'm not going to fix all the problems. So, I'll help where I can, but I'll also put a certain burden of responsibility on the players. I'm not going to look up every little thing for them if it's readily available, in a book or something like that. And for this, I'm not going to go back, because I already spent time calculating everything up and posting and following them up. I'm not going to go and dig back into a year and a half's worth of logs and figure out exactly how much XP they should be at. So by me just kind of saying, okay, I think based on everything I know, and you guys be this and you be this and you be that, they may have come out ahead, or they may come out a little bit behind. But either way, I was like, that's how we're going to do it. And from this point on, you're responsible for making sure your XP is right, because it's going to be tracked in the Facebook group. Now, one thing that'll be off a little bit, but this won't be enough to really throw things off, is as they, like I said, if they roll to recap and they roll low and then they recap and I say, okay, take 70 XP, that I won't be tracking on Facebook or anything like that. But they'll, that's not going to be enough to throw things off by a wide margin. So the last thing I wanted to mention, and I would encourage you to do the same thing as a DM if you are, if you use miniatures on grids, like a grid map, if you use miniatures, we had a situation come up this past session where, at the end of the session, and you'll understand this more, when I explain how we ended things. I asked everybody, what's everybody doing? Da, 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 da. They told me, and there was a little bit of moving around of miniatures on the table, and then I went, okay, stop, and I took a picture so that we could start right back up next session. And one of the players went, well, I said I was over there, and where's my miniature here? Da, da, da. And I went, okay, here's the deal. I can only go by what I see on the table. And if you just say, hey, I'm going that direction, but you don't move your miniature, and you don't ask anybody else to, and you don't move it yourself, or you don't, make sure that it got moved, I'm not going to take responsibility for that. So this is another one of those things where I'm putting responsibility on the players. And I said, since we've never talked about this, I said I'm gonna be really clear now. I said everyone is responsible for their own miniature on the map. Now, people usually move it for you. That's fine. But if it comes down to a question of where is my miniature? Why is it not where I wanted it to be? That's your responsibility. Unless I specifically hear you ask somebody, hey, can you move my miniature to whatever X spot? If I hear that and then it doesn't happen, that's good enough for us. Like, I know you specifically asked for that. So I would recommend that other DMs that use miniatures and maps do the same thing, because then it just, it solves all the, retconning of who, what, and where. That's your miniature. It represents your character. You are responsible ultimately for making sure that it has correct placement on the map. So there you go. That was another thing that we did, that we established the other night that I would recommend. Okay, so that's the stuff that came out of the session that's just sort of in general. So here's the actual, story part of what happened last session. One is, I did have that player come back, and I was glad to have them back. They're a good player. They've been gone well over a year. And they finish college. I guess some people finish college mid winter or whatever. They don't walk in the summer or whatever. But they're done with college. They came back, and so they rolled up a character, and I worked with them on the character and reintroduced that character. Now they rolled up a wizard, very by the rolls and everything, totally legitimate, very, very, very genius level intelligent wizard. So to work them back in, because think about it, where's the party right now? They are in the Worm Nursery in the middle of the Wormwrithings. So thank goodness that, previous to this, I instituted the Sending Stone communications method and that limited teleportation device that Vizerin from the Tower of Vengeance gave them, because that helped me work this character in. So we had also established narratively at the beginning of part 2 of Out of the Abyss, when they've escaped the abyss, and then King Bruiner sends a messenger, says, can you come back to Gauntlgrim? So they're all part of the same guild, the Vanguard of the Eye. So they traveled back to Gauntlgrim as a group. And we, very specifically said that there is a larger group than just your party. And your guild is going to establish a small camp fairly near Gauntlgrim, because part of Gauntlgrim is up on the surface. So if they're, just to maintain that line of connection between the guild and Gauntlgrim, because that's a pretty big deal. Like, they've been asked to come to this major dwarven kingdom being reestablished in the Underdark, and things sound serious. So that was the kind of narrative reasoning. There's supplies, there's a few more guild members, there's hired hands and that sort of thing. But the in-game reason really is to, if we need replacement characters, which could happen, they're in the Underdark, or in this case, got a new player rejoining, or a player rejoining, so I need to establish a reason for a new character to come in. Now, there's other ways you can do this in the Underdark, but we try to keep it in our group so that everybody's part of the same guild. Because that solves a lot of narrative issues, and they also like that. Like, we're all part of the same guild, and we're building this guild legacy. So I had that character. We established last session, I think it was last session, that horrible, bad, no good diplomatic things are happening in the Underdark because of what the Moon Elf Warlock did when she had that huge gemstone in Mantle Dareth that had a demon lord trapped inside of it, and she purposefully just boop and touched the ranking drow in Mantle Dareth with it. So not only is there a personal vengeance issue between that drow and her house and this character, but there's also now the drow are using it to put diplomatic pressure on Gauntlgrim and King Bruenor, because even though technically these adventurers are not direct representatives of King Bruenor, nobody's dumb here, and people are very suspicious or pretty sure that this has all been engineered by King Bruenor, which really King Bruenor put everything in motion and has promised them rewards and stuff. And so while they're not technically agents of King Bruenor, they're agents of King Bruenor. So, and in politics and diplomacy, sometimes just making the assertion or, leaving things hanging in the air can bring a lot of problems. So what I did in the game was King Bruenor sent to that outpost, that temporary outpost of the Vanguard of the Eye that's camped near Gauntlgrim on the surface, and said, okay, I need somebody, A, who is intelligent, and B, who knows this moon elf warlock. And so this character, the new character that's coming in, is incredibly intelligent, and all of the guild members know each other on a certain level. Some of them know each other very well. Some of it's just like coworkers, like, yeah, I know that person. We sat in meetings together sometime or whatever. And they also traveled from Phandalin to Gauntlgrim together. So, he knows her on a certain level. And he's also the most intelligent person, basically, and everybody knows it, and he knows it. So he goes to Gauntlgrim and gets welcomed in, with the same courtesy and pomp on a certain level as the players did when they originally came back to Gauntlgrim, or came to Gauntlgrim in the first place at the beginning of part 2. And long story short, Bruenor's, like, while being very polite and extending courtesies and this and that and the other, and treating this character as this wizard as an honored guest, and also made it plain that he wasn't happy, and he had a real problem on his hands. And on a certain level, since this warlock is a member of the guild, and this other character is a member of the same guild, and all the guild on a certain level is culpable because it happened while she was an official representative of the guild, and it's causing all kinds of problems. So, they kind of talk, and Bruenor's a little bit disappointed that he doesn't know more directly, that this wizard isn't more intimately familiar with the moon elf. But, he's like, I understand the problem here. And Bruenor, by the way, was very good at explaining that there was a big problem without giving the exact details. Being very discreet on the exact details, but at the same time getting across that she messed up in a big way and it's causing all kinds of problems, and I need more information about who she is, and da-da-da-da. So Bruenor just said, okay, I need you to stick around as an official representative of the guild here in, the court, at court, basically, the royal court, and then, stick around, and I'll call on you if I need you, which I'm sure I will. And so the character's already, the player's already determined, well, I'm not sticking around very long. I'm going to take it upon myself to go in to the Underdark and try to figure out what's going on. And really kind of, I think in the back of my mind, I'm thinking Bruenor kind of wants that to happen, but he doesn't officially want it to happen, but he kind of doesn't mind if the guy goes out and, helps facilitate getting this moon elf back sooner or whatever. And so while the player was there, I allowed them to metagame a little bit, and they said, hey, I heard about this chess game thing that the other players weren't able to do to win a Shield Guardian. So I gave them a chance at it, and it's best 2 out of 3, and it came down to the best of 3, and they won on the last roll. So remember that the person they play against has a +9 and on an intelligence roll. So you do 3 matched intelligence roll. The guy that they're playing against has a +9, and I think this player had a +5. But he managed to win because the opponent rolled low twice, and so this player won the Shield Guardian. And let's see if I can remember what the name of the guy they play. He's the representative of the Harpers, I think. But one of the things he does, he likes to gamble, and he basically says, if you can beat me at chess, then I'll let you take my shield guardian as help, during this crisis. Yeah, it's Lord Zelron Roaring Horn, and that's on page 126 and 127. So anyway, this character won the shield guardian, so he gets the amulet and gets the shield guardian, and that shield guardian, the guy also tells him that shield guardian has a lightning bolt spell stored inside of it. So, long story short, the player takes his character and goes off into the Underdark, and I basically just montaged it, and we just said, okay, and I'm not always going to allow the character to be this smart, but the intelligence of the character played in for this one time, that managed on his own and with the shield guardian to go into the Underdark, not only survive the Underdark, but make his way to the Tower of Vengeance and make his way through that secret door that does massive damage and all that, and suddenly just pops up at the outpost that the party has established in the Tower of Vengeance, and say, hey, I need you to let everybody know that, I need them to come get me, or I need to know where they're at, or whatever. So a couple of frantic sending stone calls later, a couple of very wow kind of outpost expedition members kind of like, there's a guy here who says he knows you and he needs to come to where you're at. Anyway, they use the wand, and again, this is something I made up, it's not in the book, the wand of limited Underdark teleportation, Vengeancy Underdark teleportation, to come back and get him, and then go back to the Worm Nursery. And it was funny because the Warlock is the one who used the spell to come back and to go back to the Tower of Vengeance, and he was like, what did you do? So there was some funny role playing, and she's like, what's the big deal? And then they go back to the main group that's in the Worm Nursery, and he again is like, there's something serious is going on, and he, King Bruiner really needs to sort all this out, and she's caused big problems. So that's that's some interesting role playing going on there, and again, this major diplomatic crisis going on in Gontal Grim and in the Underdark in general is not in the book. I mean, I used that behavior, that moment or whatever of the Warlock, which was like, whoa, you did what? And I'm really trying to role play it out and have fun with it, but also make the point that, your actions, especially your rash, strange actions, can have consequences. So there we go. So now the Worm Nursery. All right, so the Worm Nursery begins on page 172. And if you'll remember last video, at the end of last video, they had explored, and there's a map on page 173, and they had explored areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it seemed to be that's all there was. And they took a long rest, and at the end of the long rest, two things happened. One, they got the sendings, they had the as I said last time, there was a rumbling to the east, and then there was sort of a noise, and then sort of a change in the acoustics and the general feel of the cave. And that was because tunnel T1 had opened up from a purple worm. Now, if you look on page 172, there's a sidebar that shows there's tunnel T1 on the map, tunnel T2 on the map, and tunnel T3 are not there when the party first arrives into the Worm Nursery, but they open up at specified times. Now, T1, which is the tunnel that opened up when, I said after their long rest with the rumbling, and there's sort of a change in the acoustics and stuff, and that was a big clue to them. Go back and see, because, now there's an opening into Area 8 in the Worm Nursery proper. But that's supposed to happen 15 minutes after the party enters Area 1. I didn't have that happen. I had that happen after a long rest. It just worked better into the flow of my session. Now, and then 10 minutes after that, there's supposed to be a second purple worm tunnels in and opens up T2. All right, and then 15 minutes after that, another purple worm digs tunnel T3. So, and then visiting worms are heralded by a low rumbling sound 2 minutes before they appear. Uh, and then there's bats in area 9 that can also flee around, that can flee, and they'll flee while the rumbling and all that's going on, and they'll go back to their roost. So purple worms ignore intruders except those in areas 5 or 8, and those are these uh, area 5. There's two of those. There's these like echo chambers that we'll talk about more here in a second, and then 8 is the main area with the eggs in these clusters hanging off of the floor of the cavern. But I did not. Again, I had T1. That tunnel happen several hours, at least 8 hours, because they took a long rest after they first got to area 1, not 15 minutes. And then I didn't do T2 and T3 at all. I just didn't. It just didn't fit well into the flow of what I was trying to do or whatever. And, and the point's already been made that worms are opening up areas. But if, by all means do that if you want. I may have a worm come through and open up T1, T2 or T3 unexpectedly, or spontaneously, but I'm not planning to right now. Now, because as I look at the map, really they can get to wherever they need to go without those tunnels being opened up. I don't see that. I mean, they make it a little bit easier to move around certain parts of the Worm Nursery map, but I don't see them being critical other than T1 for accessing areas of the map. So, some other things you need to know about. Area 5, and there are 1, 2, 3 area 5s, and those are echo chambers. These 3 60-foot high caverns, hollowed out and expanded by purple worms, are set around area 8 as a defensive measure. Using their saliva, the worms have created thick resinous strands that stretch from wall to wall. These strands are 2 foot thick and suspended some 50 feet above the floor. Any noise in one of these chambers, including a normal speaking voice or metal striking metal, etc., causes the strands to reverberate, creating a loud humming that echoes throughout the surrounding caverns, alerting the purple worms to the presence of trespassers. If the adventurers set off a humming in one of these echo chambers, a distant rumbling can be heard and felt as a purple worm burrows toward the egg chamber, arriving there in 1d4 minutes. And they'll show up in area 8, which, there's more details for area 8. Now, another thing you need to be aware of is area 6 is the Caretakers' quarters. And there's a Fomorian in here named Stronk. And a Fomorian is a big, nasty giant. They're all deformed and nasty and yucky. And they have an evil eye thing they can do. And they get 2 attacks with a great club and all this stuff. And somehow he's formed a bond with the purple worms, and he caretakes the eggs. He regularly checks the eggs, brushes fungus off of them, and defends them against predators. Also in Stronk's area, he does have some treasure, so make sure to pay attention to that, including a couple of potions of greater healing and some cash and jewels. But yeah, if he sleeps, right now he's sleeping on a pile of skins and loudly snoring. People looking around see the remains of his meals, which are travelers lost in the Wormwrithings or egg hunting adventurers. If you go into his lair without waking him, or going into his lair without waking him requires a successful DC 12 dexterity stealth check. If he wakes up, he yells about killing egg thieves and and starts attacking. So he will fight to defend the nesting area and protect the eggs. If he's reduced to half his hit points or fewer, he charges into an adjoining echo chamber and bellows, starts yelling to summon a purple worm before jumping back into the battle. That's if he gets to half his hit points. So be aware of that. Now, there's some other areas on this map. There's let's see, there's a chamber or a chasm. We already explored that in number 4 last time. Let's see, there's the entry chamber. And in this area 7, the entry chamber, within pretty soon after the adventurers arrive into area 8, you should have the Dark Hunters arrive. And the Dark Hunters are experts at uh, getting into these worm nurseries and taking eggs, and they're drow. And the leader is the mother of the younger drow female that, the adventurers befriended last session. So depending on how that encounter went, depending on whether they treated her well, or she's with them but they didn't treat her well, or they killed her, or she's not with them at all, or whatever, can play into how the encounter with the Dark Hunters goes. And best case scenario, they befriended the young drow, helped the young drow, and then that gives a favorable for a drow anyway reaction from the leader, the mom, and there's no open hostilities or anything like that, and it can even help the party later in the chapter where they go to Menzo Bronzen. It can potentially help them then. So you want to be aware of that. It's very important to be aware of these drow, these Dark Hunters. Now, Area 9 is a bat cave. You want to check that out. Area 10 is a slop cave, which can, if they dig around in this slop cave, they may attract spiders, but there's some loot that can be found digging around in this slop cave. There's a giant, Area 11 is a giant spider nest, and then Area 12 is a chasm that if they mess around with this chasm, they might be able to get a gem of brightness. So, and if there's 8 giant spiders in this nest, but they do occasionally go into the Area 8. The top of Area 8 is covered by spider webs, so it's possible there's some random encounters in Area 8, and a spider is one of them. Now, Area 8, and this is the area you really need to be familiar with, Area 8 is this big, huge open area where there's all these egg clusters, and the eggs are giant, or not giant, they're 3-foot diameter silver spheres. That's the eggs of the purple worms. And they have an AC of 20, but if they take any amount of damage, they're automatically destroyed. And that includes if you drop one, even though its AC is 20, it'll smash, and it's no longer any good. And these things, these eggs are suspended in clusters together by more of this kind of worm saliva, this solidified, rubbery, kind of quivery, sticky to a certain extent, I guess, worm saliva, just like these echo chambers had. And you need to look at the map. The clusters are suspended at different levels. One of them's 50 feet up, one of them's 20 feet up, another one's 10 feet up, 40 feet up, 20 feet up, 40 feet, 30 feet. And also on this map, it'll show you, because there's some sort of strands that shoot off and attach to the cavern walls, and it'll show you, okay, this one is actually at 0 feet. This one is at 20 feet up on the wall. This one is at 0 feet. This one is at 0. And so it says there's kind of some strands that come down that will allow the party, or the Dark Hunters, to kind of shimmy up and get into the clusters, and you've got to kind of spend time. I think it's 1d4 minutes or 2d4 minutes, to cut an egg out without breaking it. If you fight or take strenuous action atop a strand, you have to succeed on a DC 10 dexterity acrobatics check to avoid falling. If you reach an egg cluster and you have a suitable cutting tool, such as dagger, sword, or axe, you can carefully hack an egg out in 2d4 minutes. The upper reaches of the egg chamber are covered in webs spun by the giant spiders in Area 11. Some of these webs reach all the way down to the egg clusters. For every 5 minutes the adventurers spend in this room, check for a random encounter by rolling d20 and consulting the egg chamber encounters table. On a d20, 1 through 15 is no encounter, 16 through 18 is one giant spider from Area 11, and 19 through 20 is one purple worm. I did not do the random encounters. Okay, but I did have a spider show up. So giant spiders will walk on the ceiling and surprises the adventurers unless someone in the party has a passive perception score of 14 or higher. And if a purple worm appears, it enters the nursery through the tunnel in area 7. 7 encircles the outside of the cavern. Any party member in the egg chamber can try to hide. So this is what'll happen. Uh, and I had the this drow. I think her name is Hannah. Hane. What is her name? Yeah, Hane. That's the younger drow. Her mother is Zora. But I had Hannah, because they traveled a little bit together before they found the Worm Nursery. And so I had her do a little bit of exposition, info dump or whatever on the party. And one of them is, uh, if a purple worm shows up, get super still. That's your best bet. So it's kind of like the graboids from Trimmers, right? Uh, and initially in Jurassic Park, they said, stay still. And a Tyrannosaurus can't see you because it only sees movement, even though that was later shown evidently not to be true or whatever. But the best thing to do is a DC 10 dexterity stealth check, and you just freeze, and that's the best way to keep from attracting the attention. So the purple worm attacks anyone it detects in the chamber except the giant spiders and the Fomorian, that giant. It won't pursue fleeing characters anywhere except in the adjoining echo chambers or the slop cave, area 10. If it doesn't detect any intruders, the purple worm exits the complex to the tunnel in area 7, passing through the nearest echo chamber along the way. So there you go. That's kind of the main thing. Now, when the Dark Hunters show up, at first they're like, whoa, here's all these drow. If Hannah is with the party, she's obviously delighted to see them. And if things have gone well with Hannah, the drow, for the most part, are happy to see her and not outright hostile to the adventurers, and maybe can have a little bit of discussion. The way I played it, because my party was indeed kind to Hannah, was that the Zora was like, I thank you, because of the boon you have given to me in my house. We would dispatch any intruders that we found in the, because this is what we do. This is our thing. You're on our turf, basically. But there will be no hostilities. And you will be free. We will go about our business, and you will be free to go your own way, assuming that you do not interfere with us. And I think she said something along the lines of, and maybe perhaps the fates will allow me to repay your kindness, or whatever. I don't know if she said kindness, but what you have done. And that was a hint I gave to the party that, in the future, there may indeed be a chance for that, as I've already mentioned. Now, they also, the party was like, will you help us get an egg? And they were like, no, we're not going to help you get an egg. That's definitely something we're not going to do. But you may watch us, and you may attempt yourself, but don't interfere with us, and whatever. But if you can earn an egg, take an egg. And they also said, we also advise that you make as little a noise as possible. So the party kind of watched the drow, and the drow have all this gear, and they have these special nets where they cut them and lower them down, and all this stuff. And there was somewhere in here, and I can't find it again now, but somewhere in here, it gave like a DC 14 dexterity check or something, on if you watch the drow and then you want to copy what they do. I think it gave like a DC 14 dexterity check or something to do that. And I'll be darned if I can find that. So either I made that up in my head, or I just can't find it. So anyway, you need what is it? Yeah, I just can't find it, how to get the eggs down. So what I did was I gave them a dexterity check, because they specifically said they were going to watch how it went. And so I gave them like a DC 14 dexterity check or something, and they rigged up this rope and blanket and all this situation to lower the eggs down. and actually the first time one of my players tried it, they dropped the egg, but then the one of the players below attempted to catch it, and I gave them a difficulty check, and they managed to catch it without breaking the egg. So that was kind of fun. Now, and then they realized, they said, because the drow like hit a bunch of the clusters, and so not every cluster had eggs left in it. And they said, well, what clusters have eggs left? And I said, well, you have a 10-foot cluster and you have a 40-foot cluster. And they were like, well, let's do the 10-foot cluster, which made sense. And then they realized, they said, well, how big is this shield guardian? And I said, well, it's large. And they said, well, we'll just have the shield guardian grab the eggs and lift them down. I said, works for me. So that was a clever bit with them. Now, one thing I did with the shield guardian, and I did this because the book recommends, if you win the shield guardian, that you just give the stats of the shield guardian to the player. And I'm like, okay, I've already, I'm at 7 players. Now I'm at 8 because, my old player came back. If I give them the shield, that's essentially 9 players, 9 player characters, or 8 players plus a really super beefy familiar. And I said, I'll tell you what, and I think I'm going to have some fun with this. I'm not going to work it against the player, but we may have a little bit of fun with this. I said, you will give the shield guardian its commands, and then I will do the shield guardian for you. It'll get an initiative count. You tell it what to do, and I'll roll for it and all that. And I think it'll be kind of fun and reinforce the fact that this thing is working for you and you're not just controlling it completely. Like, you give it a command, but then it executes the command the best of its ability. So I think that'll be kind of fun. So anyway, yeah. So they're eventually probably going to get an egg, right? And they were continuing to try to get more eggs. And what I had happen, again, because we only have 2.5 hours to play. So instead of doing random encounters and this and that and the other, I wanted to give them a fun, challenging encounter that could also go sideways on them. So what I had happen, I said 2 things happen simultaneously. One is this nasty, awful-looking giant comes walking up, and I put him on the map. And then the other thing is, from this area, a giant spider comes in and notices the party. And so that way, and I set them pretty far away from each other on the map, at opposite directions. And also, this chamber is pretty big. It's roughly 200 by 200, and then the ceiling is 80 feet high. So and I've got one player up in a cluster trying to cut out another egg, and so the spider is going to go for him. And then you have this giant, and the party is kind of spread out a little bit. Some of them are under the cluster trying to catch eggs, and some of them are over, like when the first egg got saved or taken. And by this point, the drow hunters have left. They did the dark hunters have done their thing and they've left. And Hana was kind of like in front of her drow. She was like, but when they left, she was like, kind of to the party, showed a little bit of warmth. And one player said, why specifically I take the egg away from everybody else, and I just kind of set with it. So I had one player way off, and so then I've got 2 different creatures coming in and creating sort of a 2-pronged situation. So that was fun. And to add to it, they had thrown a silent spell around the cluster and underneath the cluster, so if an egg dropped and broke, it wouldn't make any noise. And the only player that noticed the spider was caught in that silence, and so it was like, but nobody heard the warning, so they're the only person that knows that spider's up there. So that was fun. So we had a fun combat with that. And during that combat, the spider was coming down the web or whatever, to the strand, to get to the player, and they ended up killing the spider in a way that kind of set it on fire, and so it plummeted off of the strand, and the player dodged, but it hit the egg sac, and it's like all the legs are, and it just broke the egg cluster, like all the eggs in there. That was kind of a fun, unexpected moment, kind of a spontaneous thing, but it made sense. Well, anyway, so they had a big fight. They fought the Fomerian. They got the Fomarian down. It did its evil eye damage on somebody, and the evil eye's nasty. Go research the Fomarian, because not only is it tough and has a lot of hit points, but it's got 2 different evil eye attacks it can do, including doing an evil eye and making somebody else all deformed and stuff. It can do a multi attack with the evil eye and the club, or 2 hits with the club, or I guess it's nasty. And it's great club attacks. Get +9 to hit and do pretty decent. I think an average of 19. So go read the Fomarian. It's a pretty good monster. I think it's like CR8 or something like that. But I had him just kind of come in scratching his, oh, what are you doing? And the rogue actually in his first round turn did a charisma on the Fomarian, trying to get it talking, and succeeded. And so the Fomarian's like, huh? And then, the rogue said something like, hey, you want an egg for breakfast? And then that just, set the Fomarian off, because he's all about protecting the eggs. And then after that, the rogue was taunting him about omelets and stuff. And, they were talking in Undercommon. Anyway, it was a fun fight. And when the Fomarian got under half hit points, I had him start running south towards that echo chamber and his chambers, yelling at the top of his lungs. And they managed to drop him right before he got into Area 5, but he had been yelling very loudly and bellowing, and so it did start the humming going in Area 5, which was in everyone. It was like, oh, and people, some people were like, let's loot this, and other people were like, let's go. So anyway, and that's kind of where things ended. They do have an egg. And it's this big 3-foot egg, and it's silver. And we kind of had fun talking about one of my favorite Star Trek, the original series episodes, is Devil in the Dark with the Horta, where they have the little silver spheres, little multicolored, I don't know, they're metallic, and those are Horta eggs. We're talking about the no kill eye, that famous scene with the Horta. It was like, well, does it mean don't kill me, or I'm not going to kill you? Or anyway, it's one of my all-time favorites. And I said, where I was talking about the silver eggs, and I said something, just having fun, and I said, what Star Trek episode would does that kind of remind you of? And one of my older players was like, oh, and got it, and I just goofing around and gave him like 50 XP or whatever. I don't do that all the time. It just depends on my mood. I rarely just throw out XP arbitrarily, but we had not done the recap that night, because I spent that time reintroducing the other player and character back in. So anyway, that's rabbit hole. Let me check over here and see if there's anything else that I forgot to mention. The humming is going. That's where we stopped. They've got the egg. They hear the humming. They don't know what the humming is, but they suspect it's not good. And, they know that the Droughts had tried to keep it quiet. And then they got into that fight. And then the Fomarian was purposefully bellowing towards that area. And now there's a humming coming out. So, because he died like right at the entrance to it. So, that's where they're at. And some of them were like, let's get out of here. Some of them are like, well, let's check stuff out. And so some of them are going one direction, other going another direction. Everybody pretty much assumes danger's coming. And that's why that one player, when I kind of, okay, what's everybody doing? And, everybody kind of told me. And then I said, okay, people were rearranging stuff. And then once the last person pulled their hand off or whatever, I was like, okay, stop. Took a picture so that we could resume exactly with that same placement on the map. And that's when that one player was like, wait a minute, my miniature didn't get moved. And I'm like, but it's one of the reasons that I'm like, okay, well, we're going to stick with it as it is in the picture is because they have a couple of minutes. I may have the purple worm bust in a little bit before that, just for that great effect. Purple worm is a very dangerous opponent. It's like CR 15. So, I'm not going to have it come right in and just kill somebody right off. But if they choose to fight a purple worm, it's not going to go super easy on them. A purple worm is nasty. But it states specifically if whatever intruders are in the area leave the area and they're not in Area 8 or any of the Area 5s, the echo chambers, purple worm will leave them alone. So, they have more than enough chance to survive. Even the person who they're miniature wasn't where they wanted it to be. So anyway, let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to mention. Yeah, the humming sound is going. One of my players theorized after the session that the humming is a swarm of Fair's mutated sturges, which, while that is not what the humming is, as we know now, I think that's very imaginative, and I would like to create a swarm of Fair's mutated sturges, or perhaps a swarm of Fair's mutated roctopuses. Roctopus! Did you see that? I got so excited. Roctopuses, baby. Roctopuses. So we haven't had a good roctopus scene in Shane Plays in a while, so we need some roctopuses. So, okay. I think that's it. I think that is all my notes that I wanted to share with you. So, that being said, we will wrap here. And I will very much enjoy talking with you on the next episode of Shane Plays. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave this video a thumbs up and a comment if you would. That helps me tremendously. Share this out. If you like this content, share it with others, and maybe they'll like it too. Helps me a lot. But anyway, we will catch you next time on Shane Plays, and thanks so much for watching.